It's the 1900s in Hungary, and a disturbed and deranged psychopath, Bela Kiss, is murdering again and again. Over a decade of brutal killings, and it goes completely unnoticed. How did he get away with it, and who stopped him? This is True Crime with Emma, and if you like true crime, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. I also have a podcast on Spotify. Just search for True Crime with Emma. This week, we're going to look at the case of Bela Kiss. Born in 1877 in Hungary, Bela Kiss is a very intelligent child. Not much is known about his childhood. There are some rumours that he had an incestuous relationship with his mother. There doesn't seem to be any early warning signs. There's no violent tendencies, no disruptive behaviour. In 1900, as a young adult, he moves into rented accommodation in a village called Sinkata. He is a very well-liked member of this town. He's charming, attractive. He hosts many parties. He's a trained tinsmith and works very hard. In 1912, Bela married a girl called Marie. She was 15 years his junior at 20 years old. Shortly after the marriage, Bela found out that Marie was having an affair, and not long after that, Marie and her lover vanished. Bela Kiss stated that they fled to America to live a new life, and he was left heartbroken. After this, Bela decided that he did not want to marry again and remained a bachelor. To help him keep his home, he hired a housekeeper. Now, the housekeeper always stated that Bela Kiss was a very good man, very reliable. The one thing she did notice, though, was that he would often have women at the house. He would have a new lover every couple of months or so. They would always arrive at Bela's home, stay for a little while, and then vanish. The housekeeper never questioned this. She just thought that perhaps it didn't work out. This routine went on for a number of years. Kiss would bring back a lover. They would be around for a day or two and then disappear. At the same time, he also began collecting very large steel drums in his garden. When these drums began to appear, even the neighbours were a bit suspicious as to what was inside them. They phoned the police. The police came and investigated and asked Bela Kiss what's inside those steel drums. This is around 1912, 1913, and Bela said that he's just storing gasoline because of the upcoming potential for war. If war did happen, gasoline was going to be rationed. The police believed that this was a logical explanation and left it there. No one had any suspicion as to how dark and sinister what he was storing really was. It's 1914 and World War I begins. Bela is conscripted into the army, and he instructs his housekeeper to look after his home whilst he is away. He instructs her very clearly not to go into a certain locked room and not to go anywhere near the drums. 2 years later, and no one has heard from Bela Kiss. He no longer sends letters, and it is rumoured that he has died in battle or he has been taken into a suburban prison. So his landlord decides that he's going to clear out the home in order to make it suitable for more tenants. He wants to know what's in those steel drums so that he can get rid of them. And so he grabs a knife and punches one, thinking that gasoline or some kind of, liquid's going to come out of it. He is immediately confronted by an absolutely foul stench. And he knows exactly what this smell is because he used to be a pharmacist. It is the very distinct smell of rotting flesh. He calls the police, and Detective Charles Nagay arrives. He leads the investigation and begins opening each of the 7 steel drums. Every time they find a decomposing corpse. Each drum contained a bag that had been sewn shut. In this bag was the corpse of a woman who had been manipulated into a crouching position. She had been strangled with rope, and a handkerchief had been shoved into her mouth. In order to preserve the body, the entire barrel was filled with a methanol solution. This later led to Bela Kiss being nicknamed the Pickler. All the barrels had Roman numerals on, as though he was meticulously filing them away. They also believed that Bela tailor-made those steel drums to his victims. So after he murdered a woman, he would look at her height and size and tailor-made a drum to fit that body. It was as though he was collecting women and preserving them. Some of the bodies had puncture wounds on their necks and their blood had been drained. This later earned Kiss the nickname the Vampire. It is believed that perhaps Bela Kiss had some vampiric rituals of a more sadistic and sexual nature. After opening all these steel drums, they then turn their attention to the garden. They begin digging up the flower beds and discover the body of a man. This man was his first wife Marie's ex-lover. So when he said that they had fled for a new life in America, what he'd actually done was brutally murder them both. So how has he managed to get away with this? He has been murdering woman after woman and storing them in plain sight in his garden. Now, one of the reasons as to why is probably because of his profession. He was a tinsmith, so it wouldn't be unusual to see him walking around with various tools and sharp knives. So initially, the police believed that the housekeeper must have been involved. She lived there constantly. She was around the home all the time. How did she not know that there were up to 30 bodies buried in the back garden and in those steel drums? However, when they approached her, she was clearly very stricken and very upset. She could not believe the horrors that were unfolding in that household. She then led them to that locked door, the locked door that Bela Kiss had adamantly said to her never opened. When they opened that door and went in, it was an office. There were books on how to poison, how to strangle people, and on the desk in the middle of the room was a typewriter, and carefully filed away were letters to over 70 women. They discovered that what Bela would do is he would place an advert in a newspaper under the guise of Hoffman, a widow looking for love. He would place these adverts and wait for a response. Whom he was specifically looking for was ideally a wealthy woman, mid-aged, who was lonely and had very few family ties or friends. He would then woo them. He would spoil them with gifts, maybe visit them occasionally. Having established that this next victim ticks all his boxes, he would then go and meet them in Budapest. He was very charming, very charismatic, and it wouldn't take much for him to convince them to come back to his home. And this is where the housekeeper would see these women come and go. However, these women arrive, they maybe stay a day or two, and after he has extracted the money from them, he would murder them, mainly via strangulation and sometimes poison. Many of the victims were never identified, but one of the few that were was a lady called Catherine Barger. She ran a very successful dressmaking company in Budapest. Bela managed to convince her to sell her business. She was a widow, she was lonely, she had very few family ties or friends. She was last seen leaving Budapest to go and visit Bela Kiss. Where she had few family ties, no one really raised the alarm for quite some time as to her disappearance. Another woman, Julianne Pashtag, was identified because her name was stitched into some of the clothing found on one of the victims. When they investigated her, they found that her name appeared in some court records. Julianne, along with another woman, Elizabeth, actually sued Bela for fraud. They claimed that Bela Kiss defrauded them of money on the promise of marriage. However, their case was dropped because they never appeared in court. They never appeared in court because Bela Kiss had already murdered them. When this story hit the headlines in Hungary, a mother came forward saying that her daughter, Margaret, had introduced her to a very charming man. He was very attractive, very handsome, very charismatic. On the promise that they were going to get married, this mother handed this man some money. Her daughter Margaret, however, began to get very, very frustrated with this charming man as he kept delaying this marriage. Margaret left her mother's home and stated that she was going to confront him. She was never seen again. This mother received a farewell letter from her daughter saying that she was so distraught and embarrassed about what had happened that she had fled to America. However, what actually happened was that Margaret did confront Bela Kiss. He forced her to write a farewell letter to her mother. He then brutally murdered her and placed her in one of those steel drums. So police needed to locate Bela Kiss. However, this was very difficult. There was a war going on. There were rumours that he had died or that he was in a prison camp. Also, Bela Kiss is a very, very common Hungarian name. It's a bit like John Smith in the UK. So that made it even harder to locate him. In 1916, a Bela Kiss turns up at a hospital wounded. Authorities are immediately called. However, is this the right one? When they get there, they discover that whoever this Bela Kiss was has vanished. He's switched identities with the man next to him who was deceased and fled. That is the closest they get to ever capturing Bela Kiss. It's a few years later, and in 1931, a renowned detective, Henry Oswald, who is known for having a photographic memory, swears that he sees Bela Kiss stepping off of a subway in New York. A couple of years later, there's a sighting of him working as a janitor. However, when authorities get there at this New York building, again, this man has vanished. He is never caught. He's never seen again. He is one of the few serial killers that is known that has managed to get away with murder. I think it's because of the time. There was a war going on. It was very chaotic. It's a mystery as to where he went afterwards. Did he die during the war, or did he manage to make it over to New York and live a fairly normal life? There is no true explanation for what he did. As he was never caught, we will never know the motive of his crimes. He was a very dark and very sinister character who managed to fool everyone around him, including the housekeeper who lived with him. Like a lot of psychopaths, they are incredibly charming. It is stated that he had 174 marriage proposals in his life. That was the historic true crime case of Bela Kiss. Now, some people pronounce his name Bela Kiss, some people pronounce his name Bela Kiss. I think I've just gone with Kiss throughout this one. I found this an incredibly interesting case. I studied history as a degree, and I prefer the more historic true crime cases. I know they don't tend to be as popular. My personal preference, though, would be to do more historic cases. If you like this video, please feel free to give it a like and subscribe. I also have a podcast. And as always, my name's Emma, and I will see you next time.